Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. Sorry for the long hiatus, as I said, I had to take a break and help take care of my dad for a few weeks. Thanks for giving me a chance with your continued support. I hope we can continue to grow as a community together. Massive thanks to the authors, Roxi2Star and ThatOneZed for allowing me to adapt their awesome story. Follow the link in the description to check out more of their works. Today we will be listening to the fourth part of What If Deku Had Both One for All and All for One. If you enjoy, please consider liking, commenting, and subscribing down below, and don't forget to hit that bell icon so you get notified when videos go live. Now, without further ado, let's get into the video. Chapter 8, Party in the USJ. Chapter by Roxi2Star. Izuku wasn't sure if he was pleased that he was spending his father's first day of work at UA in another facility or not. On the one hand, it wasn't likely their paths would be crossing much today anyway. Dad was just going to be setting up his office, doing some basic onboarding and paperwork. But even still, Izuku felt a bit guilty as he and his classmates walked towards the bus. "Hey Deku-kun!" Yurika called, coming up to his side in her hero outfit. He fought off the blush as she walked in stride with him. He noted her boots were different. No more heels. "How come you're in your gym clothes?" "Kikin blew my top off during our foundational hero training, remember? It's made out of a special spider silk fabric, so it'll be a bit before I get it back." He flexed his arms. "At least the gloves and mouth guard survived," he said. "Give me some protection, you know." She nodded. "How come the gloves are fingerless? Aren't those the most sensitive part of your hand?" As she asked this, she reached down and grabbed his wrist, inspecting his fingers. Izuku jerked slightly. Girl was touching him. "Oh," he fumbled, "my quirk, oh yeah, he had a lie for this ready to go. It requires skin contact. If I didn't have all 5 fingers out I wouldn't be able to pull anything towards me." The real reason was actually all for one, not that he'd tell her that. He needed all 5 fingers to make contact with someone's face in order to take a quirk. Not that he thought he'd need it that often, but you'd never know in a life or death situation. Yurika dropped his hand. "I get ya," she said. "Hey, we should sit together on the bus." "Sure." Izuku smiled before his attention was caught by the 2 broody rivals of his out of the corner of his eye, both walking towards the bus. "Kikin, Todoroki-kun. Sit with me and Yurika-san on the bus." "Go fuck yourself." Kikin snarled, but moved to stand with Izuku. "No" was the only reply Todoroki gave before simply stomping up onto the bus. "Who pissed in his Cheerios?" Kikin asked, leaning into Izuku and motioning towards Todoroki with his chin. Izuku heaved a sigh. "I did apparently. I told him I was gonna be his friend." Yurika blinked. "Really? Didn't he just give you some sort of big declaration of war?" "He was all 'you won't beat me next time we battle, and I'm going to prove I'm better,'" she said in the cutest broody voice she could muster. Izuku could feel his heart explode. Also, why would you saying you're gonna be friends would make him so mad? Izuku shrugged. "Dunno. Gonna find out though. I've tamed Kikin and that only took," he paused, thinking for a moment, "our entire lives. Todoroki-kun is gonna be a breeze after that." "Oi! You haven't tamed shit. Bad Kikin." Izuku scolded, poking his side, right where Kikin was the most ticklish. "No barking. Ahaha, I'm not a haha dog, you are. Classmates, please get on the bus in an orderly fashion." Ida yelled, chopping his arms in the air. "Man, Ida-kun is really getting into it," Yurika said, pumping her arms towards her chest. "Great work, class prez," she called to him as the 3 of them piled onto the bus. They made their way to the back, where the last of the empty seats were. Sitting next to each other, Yurika, Izuku, Kikin, and Kirishima. Across from them, Ashido, Kaminari, Ashui and Ida all sat. Izuku and Yurika chatted quietly as Kikin brooded on his other side. The bus pulled away from the main school building, heading toward their next location. Izuku glanced at Ashui for what had to have been the 10th time since they got on the bus. "Something wrong, Ashui-san?" "Call me Tsuyu-chan," she said. "Sorry Midoriya-chan. I'm the type of person who says what's on my mind, and I've been thinking." She paused, holding a finger to her mouth. It was rather cute. "Your quirk is kind of like All Might's, isn't it?" Raggy. He could feel everyone's eyes on him. He hazarded a glance around the bus and found that yep, he was correct. Everyone was staring at him. Most notably a pair of mismatched, intense, and unfairly pretty eyes. You think? He asked, trying to keep his voice calm. I dunno, All Might can't pull stuff toward him like I can. Yeah, but your super strength is the same, just a lot weaker, Kaminari said. Now that Tsuyu-chan mentions it, they are pretty similar, don't you think? I guess. Izuku said, his voice squeaking. I dunno, I always figured the strength was just my quirk, a sort of push to match the pull. I mean, it's my mom's quirk, so. Ida spoke up. Yes, you said so the other day. That you inherited your mother's quirk almost exactly. Auntie Inko didn't have push though, Kiken said, his eyes narrowing. That's new. It is, he waved his arm, hoping that would somehow dismiss the conversation. But that could just be because she was never interested in training her quirk. Or maybe it's a mutation. I mean, my dad breathes fire, so that's a sort of push, you know? Quirks are funky like that sometimes. You can ask my dad about it since he's gonna be working at UA now. What, Uncle Hisashi is? Kiken asked, taking the new juicy topic bait like Izuku planned. As a quirk counselor. Ooh, the one with the boyfriend, right? Ashido asked excitedly. They're not dating. Izuku yelled at the same time. Kiken said. Yet. If he has a boyfriend, then he's cheating on him with All Might. Yurika said with a wink. Ashido, Kaminari, and Kirishima all made loud gasps at this new gossip. We were going to lunch yesterday and All Might was totally giving Deku's dad the Kabedon move. Plus they were all giggling and flirting. Kiken growled. Tell your dad to not be a whore, Deku. Yagi is a nice guy and any bad news might kill him. Ida interjected. Now see here, he said, Midoriya-san and All Might are both UA faculty now. We only saw him post-interview success. I thought they were merely having a friendly conversation. All Might was probably just congratulating Midoriya-san on getting the job since they've worked together before. Ida was such a good guy. Friendship with Kiken over. Ida was his best friend now. Tension. Ishin? Actually, Izuku was pretty sure if he called Ida anything that familiar he'd combust on the spot. Wait. Ida-kun. Izuku hissed. To his credit, Ida recognized his faux pas at once, placing his hands over his mouth. But the damage was done. Whoa, your dad worked with All Might. Ashido squealed. And he's gonna be our quirk counselor now? Oh my gosh, this is great. He's gonna give us so many great tips on how to make our quirks better. Oh man, that's so freaking manly, dude. Kirishima cried. Think your dad can help me make my quirk more flashy? I wanna be cool like you, Midoriya. Izuku flushed from his hairline all the way down to his neck. That was so sweet. He smiled brightly, pretty sure he had tears forming in his eyes. Kirishima. No one has ever called me cool before. Thank you. I think your quirk is so cool too. You're like an unbreakable shield. You practically counter me completely. This is what I mean, Midoriya, you're so freaking manly. Kirishima said. Though if we're talking cool and flashy quirks, I gotta bring up Todoroki and Bakugo too, he said, placing a rough hand on Bakugo's shoulder. Yep, but Kaminari started. Todoroki's a complete ice prince and Kiken here has a sucky personality. Midoriya has that winning smile, so there's no doubt he's gonna be a top hero. Kiken snarled, my personality doesn't suck, you 2-bit Pikachu clone. That only made Kaminari laugh. See? He's like a rabid dog. Don't worry though, Kiken. Don't call me Kiken. It's totally endearing. I'll murder you. Kiken screamed, jumping from his seat. Izuku put a hand on his shoulder, gently forcing him back down. Kiken, relax. Kaminari-kun is just teasing you. Don't let it bother you so much. That's so cute how Mido-chan has him trained. Ashido said the strongest guy in the class has the third strongest on a leash. Hey. Izuku asked. Since when was he the strongest? I'll have you know I beat Deku's ass every week. Kiken snarled, I only lost to him because stupid fucking half and half over there wouldn't listen to me and iced the entire place over. Then he went and got distracted by Deku's spandex-clad asshole. Todoroki stood up from his seat, not far away. Izuku's eyes met his, actual anger written on his face. I was not distracted by his rear. Don't worry, Todoroki. Kaminari said I would have been in the same position if I were you. Honestly, I think we're all taken aback by his hot bod. He laughed that, or I'm a bigger bisexual disaster than I thought. That was a lot of information that passed into Izuku's brain. First of all, the strongest? No way. He got lucky. Kikin was thrown off his game by Todoroki's ice. Todoroki was probably thrown off by Kikin's inability to work as a team. The idea of him being attracted to Izuku was so far-fetched it was laughable. Todoroki hated his guts, right? He was going to fix that, but that was gonna take time, and finally. Kaminari was bisexual too? That was, wow. He was going to befriend Kaminari. Was it shallow to befriend someone just because they were the first queer person you met other than yourself? Izuku didn't think so, but... We're here. Get out, Izuku said. When did the bus stop? Izuku only shook his head and followed behind Kikin as they made their way off the bus. The USJ was massive. Izuku smiled brightly as his eyes catalogued the entire building. Shipwrecks, massive fires, landslides, torrential downpours, and earthquakes. He bounced on his feet, the slight metal clang under his foot getting louder as he got more and more pumped. Not only by the USJ, but by 13. Eureka was fangirling about as hard as he normally did. It was nice to have someone else appreciate pro heroes. I've always liked 13. A kind-hearted hero who specializes in rescue operations. I wanna be a hero just like them. She said to Izuku. 13, where's All Might? Izuku asked them quietly. I thought he was supposed to be here with you. 13 held up 3 fingers. He was a little busy this morning. So we gave him the rest of the day off. 3 fingers meant all 3 hours were up. Izuku had read the news that morning. Poor All Might, he could never resist helping people. He smiled fondly. At least Dad would have Yagi-san to help him get settled in for his first day of work. Man, he's irresponsible. Izuku sighed. Okay kids, before we begin I wanna go over a few things. 13 said, getting the entire class's attention. If you didn't already know, my quirk is called Black Hole. It can suck up anything and turn it into dust. While it's a perfect quirk for search and rescue missions, it's also a very dangerous power. I could kill someone easily. In that way, it's the same as all of yours. Izuku looked down at his own hand. All for One was a devastating quirk. He had no idea what the man his father came from had used it to do, but he'd hurt All Might to the point of near death. Izuku had a villain's quirk, through and through. He knew it was a power he'd have to use wisely. In our superhuman society, 13 continued, our quirks are heavily regulated, and for good reason. During Izuku-sensei's test on your first day you've each got an idea of what you and your classmates can do. And with All Might's foundational hero battle training you have an idea of what it's like to use those powers against another person. One wrong move and you could all seriously hurt, or even kill someone. Izuku frowned. With his powers, not only could One for All kill someone, what with its massive power? With All for One, he could ruin lives. If he were a weaker man, he could take everyone in his class's powerful quirks, make himself stronger, and destroy their futures. But today, we're making a fresh start. I'm going to show you how to use your quirk to save lives. Your quirks do not exist to hurt others. I want you to go home today with the understanding that your powers are meant to help people. That's what's going to make you all heroes. 13 finished. Eureka smiled up at him, and he smiled right back. 13 was right. It didn't matter where his power had come from. His dad came from the same place his quirk did. He did too, he reminded himself, and his dad was a good person. The best person he knew, aside from maybe All Might, but even then it was a close call. All for One was his now, just as much as One for All. He'd make use of it to protect people and save lives. Alright kiddos, let's get started. By first 13 started. Pain. Sharp stabbing pain in the side of Izuku's head so bad he nearly doubled over in nausea. Oh, he grabbed the side of his face. Deku-kun? Eureka asked. Are you okay? No, 13 get the students back. Izuku yelled. Izuku looked up, the pain fading away into a mild dull one. Izuku was now standing at the front of the group, his goggles on and looking down the steps. Izuku followed his eye line to the fountain. In front of it, a black misty portal had opened, and a group of people were stepping out. Is this a test? He heard someone say. He was almost inclined to agree if not for the pain in his head doubling down when his eyes landed on one of the people. They looked like someone with a mutation-type quirk. Massive with an all-black body, a bird-like beak, tiny eyes, and most pressingly, an exposed brain. Everything about that person set off red flags in Izuku's mind. His head was throbbing. Those, Aizawa said, are villains. Yaoyorozu put her hand to her face, but shouldn't they have tripped the alarms? Typically, yes, 13 said, alarm rising in their voice. But they aren't going off. Something must. Is this the only part of the school they're attacking? Todoroki asked, suddenly on Izuku's other side. Or are they attacking the main building as well? I'm guessing it's just here. They must have someone with a quirk who can interfere with the alarms. They've picked an isolated building as well, meaning if we did manage to contact someone it would still take some time for them to arrive. He paused, only to add, plus, they knew a class would be held here at this time. They probably have an objective, if their attack is this well planned. Izuku agreed with everything Todoroki said. That's not good if that's the case, he said. 13, do the evacuation procedure, Aizawa ordered, his capture gear at the ready. They know how to get around our sensors, so be careful. Kaminari, try and get in contact with the school, he said and readied himself as if to jump. I'll hold them off. Aizawa-sensei. Izuku yelled, by yourself? You're a stealth type hero. You'll only be able to erase one quirk at a time, and there are so many, he said. Aizawa didn't turn back. Can't be a pro if you don't have more than one trick up your sleeve, problem child. And he jumped. Izuku watched as his teacher descended on the group of villains. Several long-range style fighters readied their aim. The one in the middle couldn't fire, then the one on the right. Aizawa dodged their bullets, swiftly taking them all out. Even with his limited quirk, he was making it work. He was almost so enraptured in watching his teacher fight he nearly missed the group turning to evacuate. Midoriya-kun. Ida called, we have to go. Right. Izuku replied, turning on his heel to follow. Pain erupted in his head again. It wasn't as mind-numbing as before, or had it never left. Black mist formed in front of them. A low voice surrounded the group. I'm afraid we cannot allow you to leave. A vaguely human shape formed in the mist. We are the League of Villains. I apologize for us entering UA in such a manner, but we've come here to engage with all might. We were hoping to use this as an opportunity to destroy the symbol of peace. Pain, more pain in Izuku's head. Why did it hurt so much? It appears as though he is not here? Our intel said he was meant to be. Was there some change in plan? Ah well. I shall simply play my part and... Kaken and Kirishima jumped into action, a hardened fist and explosion ready to take on the villain. Did you think we'd just stand by and let you hurt our classmates? Kirishima cried. The mist reformed around them. Wait. You two step back, it's no use. 13 yelled. It's no surprise you are ready to battle. You are the next generation of heroes after all. More pain. Black mist surrounded them. Izuku caught a glimpse of Ida and Sato grabbing a few classmates and escaping his view. His eyes screwed shut. You will be scattered. Pain. Tortured. Intense pain. And slain. Izuku was burning hot. His eyes flew open. He wasn't sure when he'd closed them. He was alone and everything was on fire. Still in the USJ then. This was the fire disaster area. Smoke filled his lungs. He quickly pulled his face mask up over his mouth. It wasn't just to guard his face. It served as a gas mask as well. Look, it's just one measly kid, a voice called. Izuku was surrounded by villains. About 6 in all. Let's tear him apart, the one closest to him said. It was a large man who seemed to have a mutation-type quirk. He was mostly made of a shiny black rock with what seemed to be lava flowing between the cracks. Most of them had mutation-type quirks, with one expectation. A tall man in a bomber jacket. He simply had a green shield-looking thing in front of his hand where he held it out. Okay then, Izuku said, let's do this, one for all. Full cowling. He stomped his foot into the ground as green electricity crackled around his entire body. He jumped, kicking the molten lava guy directly in the face. You should really be more careful, Izuku said to him. His metal soul connected with his jaw, chipping away at the rock of his face. Ow fuck, he cried, dropping to his knees. Obsidian, that's what you're made of, right? He asked, before readying another kick. Only has a hardness of 5, he slammed the tip of his shoe into his chest, sending the guy flying into a building, black stone cracking and flying everywhere. A small stabbing pain erupted in the back of his head. Izuku ducked, just as long fingernails cut above him right where his head was moments before. He turned, staying low, and ran towards the next attacker, a woman in all black, with hair and fingernails made of metal. She swung her clawed hand again. Izuku jumped this time, landing a solid kick into her face. Her hair attempted to wrap around his ankle, but with another kick, Izuku was strong enough to break her hold. He backflipped away from her, flicking his fingers twice, the air pressure being enough to slam her into the ground. 2 more villains attacked him at once. He wasn't sure what their quirks were, other than making their appearances messed up. They looked the weakest thus far. He jumped into the air once more, slamming their heads together with a loud clang. It seemed one of them had a skull made of metal. Ah well. Izuku grabbed that one and flipped him over his shoulder into the nails girl who had just been standing up. They both flew into the building. Only 2 villains left. Shield guy and an unknown. The unknown user went first, calling the fire. Why hadn't he done that sooner? Had he been too nervous to approach? He called the fire from the surrounding area, hurling it at Izuku. Not good. He jumped to the side, the fire following him. He used his speed, crashing into shield guy, or rather hitting his shield. Izuku jumped over him, the fire flowing off the shield. It was fireproof. Shield guy turned towards him, shield at the ready. Izuku had an idea. A crazy one. He punched with 5% of one for all. Smash, he cried. It didn't break. It barely moved. Oh crap. More fire. Izuku jumped over the shield guy again. The shield had to have a limit, right? He bounced off the shield, flipping into the air. He had no choice then. He could afford to lose a whole fist, but he could manage a finger. He held his left hand, his non-dominant hand, in his right, and flicked his ring finger. Smash, he screamed, 100% of one for all, plowing directly into the shield. The wind pressure was intense. Izuku flew back several feet, landing on his butt. But the shield had shattered. This was his chance. He summoned Pull. He held out his hand, calling with all his might, full cowling still activated. The shield guy flew towards him, his face connecting with Izuku's open and waiting hand. Sorry about this, he said, I really am. I am so sorry. Izuku said softly, before applying all 5 fingers. He hadn't ever done this on purpose. He hadn't done this in years. He remembered how he felt that day. In the hospital. Mom, Izuku sobbed, pressing his face into her hand. I'm not ready. Oh Izuku, she said softly. She wasn't crying. He wasn't sure she could anymore. He looked up at her face. Mom was so pale. Her eyes had thick dark rings around them, her cheeks hollow. Her hair had grown back some. After they stopped the chemo treatment it had come back slowly, patchy in some spots, but Izuku still thought she was pretty. I'm so sorry baby, she whispered. His dad was on her other side, smoothing the hair out of her face. He was crying. He'd been crying for what seemed like days on end. This isn't right, he said softly. I just came back. I just got you back. Izuku agreed. They were a family again. Quirkless or not, Izuku had both his parents and that was all that mattered. Everyone else be well damned. Hisashi, you have to stay with Izuku, she whispered. I'm not going anywhere, Dad said, never. You need to stay too Mom, Izuku cried please. Mom only smiled, cupping his cheek. I'm never leaving you sweetheart, she said, even if you can't see me. I promise I'll always be with you. Both of you. She closed her eyes. I'm so tired. After that, she didn't say much. Izuku held her hand, wishing that she would stay. That he could keep her. Anything of her. He reached and reached with everything in him. Every part of his being wanting to pull her close. He was alone in a swirling dark void. Suddenly, his mother was there with him. A part of him. A soft pleasant feeling settled in his stomach. When he returned from the void, she was gone. But Pull had stayed. The void. Pull and one for all swirled around him and inside him. Something new joined them. A new power. Shield. A warm happy sensation settled inside his brain. It felt good, like a rush that flowed through him, giving him strength. He could feel his brain firing off serotonin. It was so good. He pushed the feeling aside. Izuku dropped the man. He fell to the floor, and held his hand up. Nothing happened. He tried again. Still nothing. He looked down at his hand, then back to Izuku's face. What did you do to me? Sorry, Izuku said, before punching him and knocking him out. Okay. Just you and me, he held up his hand. The one with the broken finger. It was screaming with pain, but the high and the adrenaline rushing through his system was preventing him from feeling it at all. A green shield brighter and thicker than the one he'd seen the man use appeared in front of him. The pyrokinesis villain's eyes widened. Is that, he growled, only to throw fire at Izuku. The shield blocked the flow of the flames. They rolled off it, like water off a duck's back. Izuku calmly walked forward, using the shield to protect him. Stay back, he warned, calling more and more fire. I'll kill you, brat, I mean it, he shouted. Izuku only dropped the shield to punch him. He went flying back into the building, falling unconscious. He looked down at his own hands. The ring finger on his left was swollen and purple. He grimaced. He glanced back at the man in the bomber jacket. Should he return the quirk? No. That man was a villain. He'd only use it for evil. Still, stealing a quirk was something a villain would do, wasn't it? Then again, Izuku would put it to much better use than he ever would. Izuku was a hero. He was going to save lives. A shield was meant to do that. Was this the right call? What would his father do? What would his mother think? What would Yagi say? Who was Izuku to decide what was right and what was the wrong call here? But he realized he was the only one here to make the call at all. His classmates had likely been spread out around the USJ. These villains mostly had quirks that complemented the area, or seemed unaffected by the heat. Which means they knew the layout of the USJ and were spread out accordingly. And Izuku was probably still at the center in the midst of the fight with the horde of villains. This shield could save lives. And on top of all of that, giving it back felt wrong. Izuku ran out of the fire disaster zone, a new quirk swirling in the void inside him. Chapter 9, Erasure. Chapter by Roxi2Star. Hisashi put the cardboard box down on his new desk. His office was decently sized, a simple room with a desk in the center and 2 chairs across from it, as well as a comfy-looking green sofa against the side wall and a brown coffee table separating them. It had a large window, facing out from the front of the building. It didn't have much in the way of personality, but it wouldn't take long to fix that. He shook his head and went back to the box to unpack. The first thing he pulled out was a picture frame. He smiled at the photo. It was himself, Inko, and Izuku at a festival. All of them were wearing yukatas and smiling like no tomorrow. He remembered that summer. It was right before Inko was diagnosed. Those precious few months they had before that were happy, unbothered by what was to come. He placed it right next to his computer monitor. Hisashi stopped to check his phone. He sent 3 texts to Izuku. No response. But he was in class. He shouldn't be replying anyway. Still, something didn't quite sit right with him about it. He tried to shake it off and pretend it was fine. Next, he began to file away all his analysis notebooks. He'd told Nedzu he'd make a database for the school, along with logs of any of the students' quirks that he'd be working with. He hummed a tune to himself quietly as he continued to put things away, only looking up when he heard a soft knock at the door. "It's open," he called. Toshinori opened the door, stepping into the office. He looked a bit silly in the oversized yellow suit. Hisashi smothered a laugh. "Just came by to see how you were settling in," he said as he looked around. "Not a bad space they gave you. I'll need it for when I start doing tests with some of the kids to help them stretch their powers, but Nedzu said I can use one of the gyms if I need to," he said. "He wants me to focus on the first-year students since they want files and quirk workout regimens by the end of the first term." Hisashi smiled. "They're going to be doing a training camp. With the wild pussycats." Toshinori nodded, taking a seat in one of the chairs opposite his desk. "Will you be going with them?" He shrugged. "If I can. Though I'm sure Izuku will have my head if I embarrass him," Hisashi laughed, "which only means I'm gonna have so much fun tormenting the kid." "Are you sure you're not a supervillain?" Toshinori asked with a sly smile. Hisashi reached over and flicked him in the nose. "Anyway, I thought you said you were going to the USJ today? Rescue training, right?" "I was. But well, on my way to work this morning I got a bit distracted," he said, his hands fidgeting in his lap. "Tosh," he put the cardboard box down on the floor and sat at his desk. You have to stop doing this, he said. You made a promise when you took this job to put the education of those kids before anything else. Now that Izuku has won for all, you're only going to get weaker. I know it's hard to ignore someone in need of help, but there are so many great pro heroes in the field right now. Toshinori sighed, leaning his head back. I know. Nezu already gave me a lecture. Serves you right, Hisashi said. Besides, what if something happens here at the school? What if something happens to me or Izuku? And you're spent. He looked down. I'd simply push harder. And what, burn up what little you have left? He asked. I don't mean to yell, but you have to start putting yourself first, Tosh, or there won't be any of you left at all. Until Izuku is ready to step up, which he won't be for a long time, you need to keep yourself healthy. You have to keep All Might healthy. Hisashi reached across the desk and grabbed Toshinori's hand in his lap. We still need him right now. So please, for the love of God, pace yourself. Toshinori smiled softly. Okay, I promise. No more pushing. All Might is for the kids and emergencies only. That's the spirit, Tosh. Hisashi pulled his hand back, ignoring how he missed the calloused warmth. Rely on others, please, he said with a smile. So, Nezu gave you a lecture, he asked. He sighed dramatically, mostly about teaching. You're new at the job, and you don't even have the proper credentials. Only a lot of experience, he said. If the year we spent training Izuku hadn't been so hectic, I would have probably insisted you take at least some classes. What about you? Toshinori joked, you're not a pro hero like the rest of the staff. I'm as good as, Hisashi said. Nezu is aware of my situation. He knows I'm not going into any fights anyway, not unless it's life or death. And U.A.'s security is so tight that, well, I say that when we had a security breach just yesterday, he sighed, but they're already doubling down. Nothing is getting past these walls after all of that, never mind. He changed the subject. So, are you going to stop by the USJ to say a few nice words at least? That's what I was planning on doing, he said, though Nezu said I should just take the time and rest. Not a bad plan. He's a smart man, rat, dog person. Still, Toshinori said, I haven't been able to get through to 13 or Izuwa all morning. The sick feeling he'd been fighting all morning came over him again. Izuku hasn't replied to any of my text messages, Hisashi said. A long moment of silence passed between them. It was only broken by the soft roar of an engine. Hisashi looked out the window. Isn't that Toshinori started, already standing? Ida Tinya. Hisashi finished. He doesn't look good. Izuku was in danger. Izuku ran as fast as his legs could carry him. The central plaza was coming into view. On his left was the flood zone, and to his right, was the landslide zone, where a mountain of ice stretched as high as the ceiling sat. Todoroki. Izuku almost ran in that direction but stopped. Todoroki was a competent fighter. He would survive. Midoriya-chan, Kuro. Ashui's voice called. He turned, as her head popped out of the water. Behind her was Ojiro, who had Ashui's tongue wrapped around his midsection. I'm glad you're okay, she said, walking to the edge of the pool. I'm glad you guys are safe too, Izuku said, holding a hand out to Ojiro. He took it gratefully. Oh man, Midoriya-kun, your hand, he said, motioning to his mangled finger. It's fine. I had to break it to stop a villain. I ended up alone in the fire section after they split us up. Were you two injured at all? He asked. Ojiro shook his head. No. We had to take on a few water quirk villains, but it wasn't anything Tsuyu and I couldn't handle. She did most of the work honestly. Water-based villains in the flood zone, Izuku said, hand on his chin. Yeah, the ones in the fire zone with me had a lot of fire quirks. So they knew the layout beforehand. But, he looked at Ashui. They sent Tsuyu to the flood zone. Which means they likely don't know what our quirks are, he said. I also noticed they aren't exactly, he hesitated to find the right word, strong. It's like they just got as many bodies as they could to throw at us. Ashui and Ojiro looked at each other before Ashui said, I thought the same thing. Some of them had powerful quirks, Kuro, but no idea how to use them. Izuku nodded. Exactly, he said. That means our classmates should be okay. I think Todoroki ended up in the landslide area, but he's got some crazy reflexes and amazing power, so he'll be fine by himself. He paused when a sound hit his ear. I think what I'm hearing in that direction is Kiken's explosions. He's definitely fine. They both nodded. We should get to the exit, Ojiro said. Try and get out of here, get help from the pros. Aizawa-sensei is good, but even I know fighting one on a group like that can only go for so long. We need All Might. Actually, Izuku said softly. I think it would be bad if All Might showed up. Todoroki was right, earlier before we got warped away. This attack is pretty calculated. Even though the random thugs are pretty weak, the mist guy, the one guy who was covered in hands, and the big one with the brain all seemed a lot more competent. He paused. They said they were here to kill All Might. If they went through all the trouble of this attack when they thought he was supposed to be here, he closed his eyes, almost too afraid to say the words out loud. They must have a way to do it. Kuro, Azui whimpered. Ojiro frowned. Are you serious? He asked. Oh man. We definitely need to get the pros then. If they have something to kill All Might, Aizawa-sensei won't last. Izuku nodded. Right. I also thought maybe if we stop by Aizawa-sensei, he said, starting to move towards the exit. Maybe we can lighten his load. Midoriya-kun, the last thing we should do is get in his way. Ojiro said. I know but... I'm worried. Aizawa-sensei is a pro, Azui said. We need to trust him. Izuku sighed, relenting. I know you're right. The fountain was in view now. Pain hit Izuku again. He hissed, covering his left eye where the pain was the most prevalent. This weird migraine is killing. Oh god. He stopped. Azui and Ojiro nearly smacked into him, each of them letting out a horrified gasp. Aizawa was on the ground, his face smashed into the dirt, both of his arms twisted and broken. Izuku thought he might be sick. The massive villain with the exposed brain was on top of him, crushing him further into the asphalt. Sensei, Izuku whispered. He had to do something. His entire body was frozen to the ground. The villain holding him seemed to have some kind of super strength, if the way Aizawa's broken body said anything. Before Izuku could start to formulate a plan, the mist villain appeared next to the one covered in all the hands. His deep voice washed over Izuku, carrying words that felt like ice pouring directly down his spine. Shigaraki Tomura, he said. Shigaraki. Izuku knew that name. He'd only ever heard it once. His father's face danced around in his mind. On that fateful day, when Izuku learned everything, his father had said the name Shigaraki. It was his name. Shigaraki Hisashi. It was the name of All for One. The real All for One. The villain his father had splintered off from. It wasn't a common family name. Not at all. So why did this villain have it? Why was this man named Shigaraki? Kurogiri, Shigaraki said. I hope you being here means 13 is dead. The mist responded. 13 is out of commission. However, a student has escaped. What? Shigaraki yelled. He began to scratch at himself and stomped his foot. Kurogiri, if you weren't our warp gate, I'd kill you. I would turn you into dust. It's game over if the pros show up, he sighed before he turned his head towards the three of them. Izuku jolted, pain blooming in the front of his head. It was so intense that even his eyesight blurred for a moment. Fine. I'll at least ruin his pride before we leave. He was faster than he looked. Running and getting into Azui's face before Izuku could react. His head was screaming. His hand was on Azui's face. Nothing happened. Man. Eraserhead, he chuckled, dropping his hand and turning. You are way too cool. Any slower and I'd have disintegrated this girl. Aizawa had forced his head up while the villain was distracted, his hair floating around his head, eyes glowing. He'd erased Shigaraki's quirk and bought Izuku precious time. Full cowling, Izuku said, green electricity surrounding his body. 5%, Detroit Smash, he screamed, as he threw a punch. His fist collided with the hand covering Shigaraki's face, knocking it off. Shigaraki stumbled back, his hand covering his face while the other seemed to reach around blindly for the one Izuku had knocked off. He was growling, his voice coming out strained. How not fair, he said. Dad, I need his fist clenched. I'll destroy you. Nomu. Kill the green one, he spat. Izuku expected pain. Instead, he felt cold. A wall of ice had sprung up from the ground and separated them from the villains. Todoroki had come running from the landslide zone, sliding into them. "We need to move," he called. A cracking noise brought all of their attention back to the wall, before it shattered into thousands of small pieces, letting it snow onto the ground around them. "Kill all of them, Nomu!" Shigaraki screamed, "I want their heads." "Run!" Todoroki yelled again, "We need to GE. I am here." The door into the USJ had burst open, All Might standing there in all his glory. For a brief moment, Izuku felt relief. Then the real panic set in. They had a plan. Well, Shigaraki drawled, "It looks like our game just gotta continue. Nomu, let's make All Might watch as we kill." All Might disappeared from the door frame. Izuku's eyes couldn't track him. He appeared at the fountain, holding Aizawa in his arms. Before Izuku could even process it, he, Ojiro, Azui, and Todoroki were in them as well. All Might set them down at the base of the stairs, handing Aizawa to Ojiro. "He needs medical attention. Get him and yourselves out of here," All Might ordered. "Wait," Izuku cried, grabbing All Might by the arm. "They have a way to kill you," and he trailed off. The silent "you're out of time" hung in the air between them. "Izuku, take your teacher to safety. Please don't worry about me. I'm going to show these villains what it really means to go beyond," All Might said, ruffling Izuku's hair. He desperately hoped it wasn't for the last time. He turned away from them. "Now then." Carolina, he was off, his fist slamming into Nomu's chest. Smash! Izuku could feel the ripple of power from here. But nothing happened to Nomu. "What do you think, All Might? Nomu here has perfect shock absorption. He's engineered to take 100% of your power," Shigaraki said. "He's just as strong as you two, making him the perfect tool to kill you with." His quirk was shock absorption? How the hell was All Might going to survive if his attacks wouldn't do anything? He's weaker than he was before. As long as Nomu still had his quirk then. Nomu grabbed All Might, suplexing him into the ground. All Might was going to die. Unless... "Ojiro, Azui, Todoroki. Take Aizawa back," he said, placing all 5 fingers on Aizawa's face. "I'm so sorry, Aizawa-sensei," he whispered. "I promise, as soon as this is over I will give it back." Izuku reached into the void. He remembered that night in the hospital. He remembered wanting to leave the fire zone alive. He wants to save All Might right now, and to do that he needs all for one. Pull. One for all. Shield. And now, erasure swirled inside him. Once again that odd bubbling feeling overtook him. It was like his brain was filled with soda bubbles. It felt good. Izuku turned on his heel. "I'm going to protect him." "Midoriya-kun," Ojiro called out. Izuku didn't listen. "Get out of here," he snarled. A villain stepped in his way. They had a quirk where blades seemed to come out of the spaces between their fingers. Izuku closed his eyes, feeling around inside himself. His eyes opened, his hair stood on end. The blades in the villain's hands retracted. He'd erased his quirk. Izuku's fist connected with his face, knocking him back at once. Izuku turned as 2 more villains approached. He blinked, then reactivated erasure. Somehow, both of their quirks were deactivated. That wasn't right. That's not how erasure works. He'd have to ponder that later though. Instead, with a few good punches, he dispatched them both. His attention turned to All Might. "It's Nomu's duty to hold you still, as I put you halfway through a portal," Kurogiri said. They hadn't noticed Izuku taking down their goons, too focused on All Might. "I'll cut you in half." Izuku looked at Kurogiri. He couldn't quite see his physical body, and he'd need to see it to erase his quirk. Instead, he'd focus on die. Kiken's voice rang out. When had he gotten there? He leapt into action, his palm lighting up explosions along Kurogiri's body, who cried out in pain. Kiken must be able to see his body. Kirishima was on his tail. Good if they had him then. Ice rushed past Izuku, wrapping half of the Nomu's body in it and allowing All Might to escape his grip. He jumped out of the Nomu's reach. Kiken had Kurogiri pinned. "You've got our warp gate," Shigaraki said. "How annoying." The Nomu was standing. Izuku watched in horror as his limbs broke off from his body. Todoroki's ice was no joke. Then his limbs grew back. Regeneration? How was that possible? What? Shigaraki asked with a laugh. Did you think shock absorption was his only quirk? No no no. My perfect tool is made to last all might. All might. Izuku yelled, punch him, he screamed, his eyes glowing and his hair floating around his body. I've got you. I've got you. Midoriya yelled. Shoto watched as his hair floated wildly around his body. His eyes were glowing. Wait, Shoto thought back. Midoriya had said he'd give it back when he'd touched Aizawa. But there was no way, right? I borrowed something from Aizawa-sensei. No way. All Might seemed to understand what Midoriya meant. Texas, he moved so fast, smash. With a single punch, the Nomo went flying, leaving only All Might standing there, steam wafting off his body. Wait. What just happened? What the hell? Shigaraki yelled, a fucking cheat code. He looked to Midoriya. I'll kill you. Midoriya looked at him. I dare you, he snarled. He looked almost scary like that. Shigaraki ran at him. A green shield appeared out of Midoriya's hand. Since when could he do that? With his other, he pulled Shigaraki into his fist. He gave him a good punch, knocking him back several feet. Then the beatdown began. Midoriya wailed on him like the villain owed him flesh. His eyes were wet and unblinking, and a green shield blocked any hits from the other villains who had jumped in to help. Green electricity crackled around his body and he pulled Shigaraki in and punched him back away over and over again. He seemed to be anticipating the villain's attacks, even when he was attacked from behind, dodging and countering with ease. He was like a wild animal. Feral. Midoriya seemed to be in a trance. As was everyone else watching him. Shoto couldn't move. He looked, and it seemed none of them could. Bakugo's eyes were wide as saucers. Kirishima was frozen where he stood. And All Might was still steaming. He hadn't moved an inch from when he'd punched the Nomo clean out of the USJ. Why wasn't he moving? Were they all as transfixed on Midoriya as Shoto was? A first-year hero student was going toe-to-toe with the boss of the villains. Then Shoto noticed. His nose was bleeding. No one had landed a hit on him. But his nose was bleeding. His movements slowed, he was going to pass out. Shoto went to run. Shigaraki was going to. A gunshot rang out. Snipe. Shoto turned his head. The pros had arrived. They were going to be all right. Shit. Kurogiri. Shigaraki cried. Kurogiri slunk out of Bakugo's grip. He'd been too enthralled by Midoriya to stop him in time. A portal of mist appeared and in a moment they were gone. Midoriya hit the ground. The pros descended on the remaining villains, and a large wall of cement went up between the students and the villains. Cementos was next to Shoto in an instant. Take Midoriya and go, he told him. Shoto noticed All Might was on the villain's side. He nodded, running to Midoriya's side. He turned him over. He wasn't unconscious like Shoto had thought. However, he looked terrible. He was pale, his eyes twitching and red, his face was covered in his own blood that was still pouring from his nose. Hey Todoroki-kun, he whispered. Midoriya, you are insane, he said and gathered him in his arms. He was heavier than he looked. Aha, yeah, he mumbled. My head hurts, he said, too many quirks. I can't use that many. It hurts. How does Aizawa go so long without blinking? My eyes hurt. Shoto sighed, carrying him towards the steps. Bakugo and Kirishima were already halfway up them, but both kept glancing over their shoulders to make sure Shoto and Midoriya weren't too far behind. You should stop talking. You're injured. Nah, Midoriya said, just hand. I mean fingers, he said, in my brain. Brain hurt bad. Hey Todoroki, I have an idea, he said. You should grow your hair out. You just faced several villains and you're thinking about my hair, he asked. Yeah, he said, as if it were natural. You're so pretty, I bet you'd look even prettier with long hair, he said. Is it as soft as I think? Touch, he asked, but without waiting for an answer he put his good hand in Todoroki's hair. Ooh, soft, he said. Hey, I'm gonna go to sleep now, and with that, Midoriya was out cold. Shoto picked up the pace. When they got outside, police, ambulances and the rest of the students were waiting for them there. Shoto started walking towards the nearest ambulance, before being intercepted by a man with white hair and a face full of freckles. He looked panicked. Izuku! He cried. Oh my god, he held his arms out but Shoto only pulled Midoriya closer to him. Who are you? He asked. That's my son, the man said defensively. Please, he's injured. Midoriya-san. Yurarika called, running to them. Oh my gosh, Deku-kun, she cried, he looks awful. This man is Midoriya's father. Shoto asked her. She seemed to know. Yeah, this is Deku-kun's dad. Ida and I met him yesterday. Right, he said, you mentioned that on the bus. Shoto looked down at the unconscious Midoriya in his arms. Here. He needs medical attention. He mentioned something, he hesitated. Whatever was going on with Midoriya, his father would know. He mentioned something about too many quirks, he said finally. I assume you understand what that means. Midoriya-san nodded. Shoto gently handed Midoriya to him, and watched as his father cradled him close as if he were something precious. Shoto's heart clenched. I do. Thank you for keeping him safe, he whispered, before pressing a soft kiss to Midoriya's hairline. I don't know what I'd do if I lost him. He turned and ran towards the ambulance. Yurarika looked up at Shoto. What happened to him? Shoto stood there for a minute, thoughts whirling through him. What was that back there? Midoriya had Aizawa's quirk. He'd used it on Nomu. He'd used it on Shigaraki. And what about that shield? Where the hell had that come from? Had he taken those quirks? He said he'd give it back. Does that mean he'd be able to return it to Aizawa? That had to be a quirk, right? I'm not sure. Alright, that's where we'll leave off for the day. Thanks so much for listening along with me today. If you enjoyed, please like and comment down below and check out the video or playlist on the screen for more content from me. I look forward to seeing you next time. Ciao for now, lovelies.